Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. This is Joe, the bearded historian. He'll tell you an interesting story. Be careful of his soldiers, they can be brats. This is Angel, she's an entity. She'll cause chaos and plant her hands at you. This is Sue, she likes spirits, not the alcohol. She's the reason this channel exists. This is David, he likes fire trucks. He's here occasionally. Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. We preserve his story.
Okay, I am behind. But it's been a crazy day. I'm doing multiple things. I'm trying to straighten out an insurance because I screwed that up. So far, I've been re-added. I have to get Joe and Angel re-added. I'm also working on Wayback Wednesday, which is this video, which hopefully will be up before the end of the day. I'm working on my membership video and the shout out for the 25K. And also, we're almost to 26. You people need to stop. Just kidding. We appreciate all of you. But let me see. Where was I at? What was I doing? Oh, yes. Are you ready? Here we go. Shout out time. Here's a shout out just for you. You support me, so I support you. This shout out is for our friends. Let's see who it is today. And we've got a doggy race, dog sled race. Hold on. All right, there's our race. Start. Okay. We got She Stole. We got Keep Digging. Catching. There's Rock. There's Misty. There's Zoll. There's Susan Rambles. There's Sea Tripping. Bluegrass. Amanda. Faces. There's Rock. Cable. Jericho. Carzoa. Debbie. Fox Clan. M&J. Marcus. Reef. Let's see, who else? There's my Linda. There's Rye, Cruising Nuts. There's Ian. Fox Clan coming from the back. Oh, that's Fox Clan. Hang on a minute. Okay, so we found Miss Ginger Fox, the horror queen, which is our Fox Clan friend. Took me some looking because I forgot her name because I just notated Fox Clan, which is what comes up when she visited our channel as Ginger Fox Clan, and so that's what I notated, and I couldn't remember the Ginger part because I didn't notate that because I'm a genius. Anyway, she's a Canadian gamer, and she, of course, likes games. We've got some baby elephants and Chucky, because why not? Some shorts, very nice. And, of course, games. Horror games particularly. Security Branch, if you like Five Nights at Freddy's, that is a great game. I love that game. Love Five Nights at Freddy's. Looking forward to the movie in the new year. Or this year. Later this year. Anyway, game. And she's wonderful. So check her out. Like, share, comment. Have a good day. Alright, he's going to tell us something. I know we're going to pretend. We're going to pretend to pay attention if I can speak words.
Hooked on Phonics worked for her.
What does Hooked on Phonics have to do with speaking abilities?
I
thought that was a reading thing.
Well, reading, writing, and arithmetic, and the whole comprehension thing.
Again, that has nothing to do with speaking.
Yeah, well, it didn't work either way. Anyway, we're going to have a more, well, you won't exactly call it current because it happened when I was way back in high school, in my junior year, that in history, it was pretty much known as the first Persian Gulf War. Well, it was the kickoff for this whole thing. Happened about the 17th of January. The main emphasis, though, dated back into August of the previous year, and it dealt with the tiny little country of Kuwait. Now, Kuwait is one of our oil producers that supplies us with oil. Iran really doesn't want to deal with us because, apparently the great Satan. Iraq, to that effect, does negotiate deals with us because, well, we keep them from being invaded by Iran. And, of course, we get oil out of Saudi Arabia. But what wound up happening, and it's one of these fun stories that goes back a number of years. During the Cold War, Iraq was fighting a 10-year war with Iran, and it was pretty much stalemating. One side would shoot at the other. Nobody was really winning. And since we did not like Iran, we kind of wanted to get on Iraq's good side. And so we promised to help them with political support, resources, non-military aircraft. And then Iran would start an offensive called Operation Undeniable Victory. Well, the U.S. had to, the U.S. was forced to increase their support to Iraq to prevent Iran from forcing a surrender. And the U.S. would open a bid for full diplomatic relations with Iraq. Let's talk to the bad guys. And obstinately, this was because of the improvement in the regime's record. Although the former U.S. Assistant Defense Secretary Noel Koch later said no one had any doubts about Iraq's continued involvement in terrorism, though real reason to help them to succeed is in the war against Iran. You got two bad guys on the block, you want to be friends with one of them.
Yeah, that seems logical.
Perfectly, yeah.
Is this the my friend and my enemy thing?
Exactly.
Okay,
yeah.
Gotcha.
Because you can't really expect, obviously if Iran won and decided to unite, you'd have a greater Persia, which would be a real hassle in more than one way. Well, what wound up happening is that arms sales to Iraq in 1982 would spike. Iraq's President Saddam Hussein expelled Abu Nadal to Syria at the U.S.'s request, and Reagan administration sent, here's a fun name for you all to remember, Donald Rumsfeld. This name would come up later in many problems. Would meet with Saddam as a special envoy and to cultivate ties. Well,
did he bring rum?
Not really. Later, a ceasefire with Iran would be signed in August of 1988, but Iraq paid for this with a large debt package. Debt was mostly owed to Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, and interesting enough, Iraq's debts to Kuwait amounted to about $14 billion.
Ooh.
That's a little pocket change. Iraq pressured both nations to forget the debts, but they refused. Well, the Iraq-Kuwait border dispute also dated back to the Ottoman Empire. At the time, Kuwait was part of the Ottoman Empire's province of Basra, and something Iraq claimed that Kuwait was rightful Iraqi territory. Well, Kuwait's ruling dynasty, the Al-Sabah family, had concluded a protectorate agreement in 1899 that assigned responsibility for Kuwait's foreign affairs to the United Kingdom. The UK drew up borders between Kuwait and Iraq and made Iraq almost entirely landlocked. Well, Kuwait rejected the Iraqi attempts to secure further provisions in the region, and Iraq would also accuse Kuwait of exceeding its OPEC quotas for oil productions.
Oops.
Let's take we want to try to blackmail America. Well, it's kind of hard when, Kuwait's willing to increase their oil production. The big thing that a lot of the cartel did was that they wanted to maintain the desired price at $18 per barrel. Discipline was required, and the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait were constantly overproducing, and the latter, at least in part to repair losses caused by the Iranian attacks, and to pay for the losses in economic scandal. Well, the result was a slump in the oil prices, down to as low as $10 per barrel. Well, this would result in a loss to Iraq about $7 billion a year, equal to its 1989 balance of payments deficit. Well, the resulting revenues struggled to support the government's basic costs, let alone repair Iraq's damaged infrastructure. Jordan and Iraq both looked for more discipline with little success. The Iraqi government would describe it as a form of economic warfare, which claimed it was aggravated by Kuwait slant drilling across the border into Iraq's Ramallah oil field. According to the oil workers in the area, Iraq's slant drilling claim was fabricated as oil flows easily from the Ramallah field without any need for these techniques. At the same time, Saddam was looking for closer ties with the Arab states that had supported Iraq in the war. This move was supported by the U.S. Can't we all just play and get along?
What fun would that be?
Yeah, the pro-Western Gulf states would also help bring and maintain Iraq within the U.S. sphere of influence. Well, in 1989, it appeared that the Saudi-Iraqi relations, strong during the war, would be maintained, and a pact of non-interference and non-aggression was signed between the countries, followed by a Kuwaiti-Iraqi deal for Iraqi to supply Kuwait with water for drinking and irrigation through a request for Kuwait to lease Iraq Qasar was rejected. Saudi's backed development projects were hampered by Iraq's large debts. Even with the demobilization of 200,000 soldiers, Iraq also looked to increase arms production so as to become an exporter, although the success of these projects was also restrained by Iraq's obligations. In Iraq, resentment to the OPEC's controls mounted. And this led to the relations with its Arab neighbors, particularly Egypt, were degraded by mounting violence in Iraq against expatriate groups who were well employed during the war by unemployed Iraqis, among them demobilized soldiers. These events drew little notice outside the Arab world because the fast-moving events directly related to the fall of communism in Eastern Europe. However, the U.S. did begin to condemn Iraq's human rights records, including the well-known use of torture. The UK also condemned the execution of Faraz Bazoff, a journalist working for the British newspaper The Observer, following Saddam's declaration that binary chemical weapons would be used on Israel if used military force against Iraq. Washington halted part of its funding. A U.S. mission to the Israeli-occupied territories, where riots had resulted in Palestinian deaths, were vetoed by the U.S., making Iraq deeply skeptical of U.S. foreign policy aims in the region, combined with the reliance on the U.S. Middle Eastern energy reserves. Basically, they didn't like us using up all their oil.
What?
Well, in early July 1990, Iraq complained that Kuwait's behavior, such as not respecting their quota and openly threatening to take military action. On the 23rd, the CIA reported that Iraq had moved 30,000 troops to the Iraq-Kuwait border. Hi. And the U.S. naval fleet in the Persian Gulf was placed on alert. Saddam believed that the anti-Iraq conspiracy was developing. Kuwait had begun talks with Iran, and Iraq's rival Syria had arranged a visit to Egypt. On the 15th of July, 1990, Saddam's government laid out its combined objections to the Arab League, including that policy moves were costing Iraq $1 billion a year, that Kuwait was still using the Ramallah oil field, and that loans made by the UAE and Kuwait could not be considered debts to its Arab brothers. No, you still owe them money. Nice try, guys. That's like trying to say, well, you're white, so your debt doesn't matter to me. Doesn't work that way.
But why?
Yeah, something about still wanting money.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, he threatened force against Kuwait and the UAE, saying the policies of some Arab rulers are American. They are inspired by America and undermine Arab interests and security. Sounds like a certain group of people that if they break the law doesn't apply to them. You figured out.
I like it.
Well, the U.S. would send aerial refueling planes and combat ships to the Persian Gulf in response to these threats, and discussions in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, mediated in the Arab League's behalf by Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak, were held on the 31st of July and led Mubarak to believe that a peaceful course could be established. Well, during Saddam Hussein's interrogation following his capture, he claimed that in addition to economic disputes, an insulting exchange between the Kuwaiti Emir al-Sabah and the Iraqi foreign minister, in which the emir stated his intention was to turn every Iraqi woman into a $10 prostitute by bankrupting the country, was a decisive factor in triggering the Iraqi invasion. Well, on the 25th, Saddam met with April Gillespie, the U.S. ambassador to Iraq, in Baghdad. The Iraqi leader attacked American policy, with regards to Kuwait and the UAE, stating, So what can it mean when America says it will now protect its friends? It can only mean prejudice against Iraq. This stance, plus maneuvers and statements which have been made, have encouraged the UAE and Kuwait to disregard Iraqi rights. If you use pressure, we will deploy pressure and force. We know that you can harm us, although we do not threaten you, but we too can harm you. Everyone can cause harm according to their ability and their size. We cannot come all the way to you in the United States, but individual Arabs may reach you. We do not place America among the enemies. We place it where we want our friends to be, and we try to be friends. But repeated American statements last year have made it apparent that America did not regard us as friends. Well, Gillespie would reply, I know you need funds, we understand that, and our opinion is that you should have the opportunity to rebuild your country. But we have no opinion on the Arab conflicts like your border disagreements with Kuwait. Frankly, we can only see that you have deployed massive troops to the south. Normally, that would not be of any of our business, but when this happens to be in the context of what you said on your National Day, then we have read the details to 2 letters of the foreign minister. Then we see the Iraqi point of view that the measures taken by the UAE and Kuwait is, in the final analysis, parallel to military aggression against Iraq. Then it would be reasonable for me to be concerned. Well, Saddam stated that it would be an attempt, last-ditch negotiations with Kuwaitis, but Iraq would not accept death. Now, according to Gillespie's own account, she stated in reference to the precise border between Kuwait and Iraq that she had served Kuwait 20 years before. Then, as now, we took no position on these Arab affairs. Gillespie similarly believed that war was not imminent. Well, on the 26th of July, 1990, only a few days before the Iraqi invasion, OPEC officials said that Kuwait and the United Arab Emirates had agreed to a proposal that would limit their output of oil to 1.5 million barrels per day, down from nearly 2 million barrels per day that they each been pumping, thus potentially settling differences over oil policy between Kuwait and Iraq. Well, the result of the Jeddah talks was an Iraqi demand for $10 billion to cover the lost revenues from Ramallah. Kuwait offered them $500 million. The Iraqi response was to immediately order an invasion, which started on the 2nd of August, 1990, with the bombing of Kuwait's capital in Kuwait City. Now, before the invasion, the Kuwait military was believed to have numbered 16,000 men, arranged into 3 armored, 1 mechanized infantry, and 1 understrength artillery brigade. The pre-war strength of the Kuwait Air Force was around 2,200 personnel with 80 fixed-wing aircraft and 40 helicopters. Well, in spite of Iraqi saber rattling, Kuwait did not mobilize its force, and the army had stood down on the 19th of July. And during the Iraq invasion, many Kuwait personnel were on leave, actually. Well, by 1988, at the end of the Iran-Iraq War, the Iraq Army was the 4th largest army in the world, of 955,000 soldiers and 650,000 paramilitary forces in the Popular Army. According to John Childs and Andre Corsaver, a low estimate shows the Iraq Army capable of fielding 4,500 tanks, 484 combat aircraft, and 232 combat helicopters. Now, according to Michael Knights, a high estimate showed that the Iraq Army was capable of fielding some 1 million troops, 850,000 reservists, 5,500 tanks, 3,000 artillery pieces, 700 combat aircraft and helicopters, and it held 53 divisions, 20 special forces brigades, and several regional militias, and had a strong air defense. Iraqi commandos infiltrated the Kuwaiti border first to prepare for the major units, which began the attack at midnight. The Iraqi attack had 2 prongs, with the primary force driving south straight for the Kuwait city down the main highway, and supporting attack force entering Kuwait farther west, but then turning and driving east, cutting off Kuwait City from the country's southern half. The commander of a Kuwaiti armored battalion, the 35th Armored Brigade, deployed them against an Iraq attack and conducted a robust defense of the Battle of the Bridges near Al-Jahara, west of Kuwait City. The Kuwait aircraft scrambled to meet the invading force, but approximately 20% were lost or captured. A few combat sorties were flown against Iraqi ground forces. The main thrust into Kuwait City was conducted by commandos deployed by helicopters and boats to attack the city from the sea, while other divisions would seize the airports and the two air bases. The Iraqis would attack the Dasman Palace, the royal residence of Quds Emir Jabir al-Ahmad al-Jabir al-Shabah, which was defended by the Emiri Guard, supported with M84 tanks. In the process, the Iraqis killed Fahad al-Hamad al-Jabir al-Shabah, the Emir's youngest brother. Now, within 12 hours, most of the resistance had ended within Kuwait, and the royal family had fled, allowing Iraq to control most of Kuwait. And after 2 days of intense combat, most of the Kuwaiti military had either was overrun by the Iraqi Republican Guard, or had escaped into Saudi Arabia. The emir and key ministers fled south along the highway for refuge in Saudi Arabia, and Iraqi ground forces consolidated their control of Kuwait City, then headed south and redeployed along the Saudi border. After this decisive Iraqi victory, Saddam initially installed a puppet regime known as the Provisional Government of Free Kuwait before installing his cousin as Kuwaiti's governor on the 8th of August.
I mean you.
Now, after the invasion, the Iraqi military looted over $1 billion in banknotes from Kuwait's central bank. At the same time, Saddam Hussein made the Kuwaiti dinar equal to the Iraqi dinar, thereby lowering the Kuwaiti currency to 1/12 of its original value. In response, Sheikh Jabir al-Ahmad al-Shabah ruled that banknotes as invalid and refused to reimburse stolen notes, which became worthless because of a UN embargo.
Oh, well then.
Yeah, crash. After the conflict ended, many of the stolen banknotes made their way back into circulation. A stolen banknote are collectible for numismatics, the coin collectors.
Interesting.
Now, Kuwaiti did have a local armed resistance movement following the occupation, and the Kuwaiti's resistance casualty rate far exceeded the coalition's military forces and Western hostages. The resistance primarily consisted of ordinary citizens who lacked any form of training or supervision. Well, they were resistance fighters. Now, straight out, they started, key element of the U.S. political, military, and energy economic planning started back in 1984. Iran-Iraq war had been going on for 5 years, so by that time, both sides had significant casualties reaching into the hundreds of thousands. Well, Reagan at that time, in the National Security Council, concern was growing that war could spread beyond the boundaries of the two belligerents. Normal National Security Planning Group was meeting, chaired by then Vice President George H.W. Bush, to review the U.S. options. And it was determined that the conflict would likely spread to Saudi Arabia and other Persian Gulf states, but the U.S. had little capability to defend the region. Furthermore, it was determined that a prolonged war in the region would induce a much higher oil prices and threaten the fragile recovery of the world economy, which had just begun to gain momentum. Well, on the 22nd of May, 1984, President Reagan was briefed on the project conclusions in the Oval Office by William Flynn Martin, who had served as the head of the NSC staff who organized the study. The conclusions were threefold. First, oil stocks needed to be increased among the members of the International Energy Agency and, if necessary, released early if the oil market was disrupted. Secondly, the U.S. needed to beef up its security for friendly Arab states in the region. And third, an embargo should be placed on sales of military equipment to Iran and Iraq. The plan was approved by Reagan and later affirmed by the G7 leaders, headed by the United Kingdom's Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady, in the London Summit of 1984. The plan was implemented and became the basis of U.S. preparedness for the response to the Iraq occupation of Kuwait in 1991. Now, within hours of the invasion, Kuwait and the U.S. delegations requested a meeting of the UN Security Council. This passed Resolution 660 condemning the invasion and demanding a withdrawal of Iraqi troops. On the 3rd of August, 1990, the Arab League passed its own resolution, which called for a solution to the conflict from within the League and warned against outside intervention. Iraq and Libya were the only two Arab League states that opposed a resolution for Iraq to withdraw from Kuwait, As well, the PLO opposed it as well. Basically, anything anti-American was right by them. Well, the Arab states of Yemen and Jordan, Western ally that bordered Iraq and relied on the country for economic support, opposed military intervention from non-Arab states, and separately, Sudan, also an Arab League member, aligned itself with Saddam. It just seemed out to anybody else that the countries that seemed to really hate America seemed to like Saddam Hussein. Figure that one out. Well, August 6th, Resolution 661 got placed in the economic sanctions on Iraq. 665 followed soon after, which authorized a naval blockade to enforce the sanctions and said the use of measures consummate to the specific circumstances as may be necessary to halt all inward and outward maritime shipping in order to inspect and verify their cargoes and destinations to ensure strict implementation of Resolution 661. Basically, we're not letting anything in that might be a problem. Now, the U.S. administration at first had been indecisive with an undertone of resignation to the invasion and even adaptation to it as a fait accompli until the Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, played a powerful role reminding the President that appeasement in the 1930s had led to war, that Saddam would have had the whole Gulf at his mercy, along with 65% of the world's oil supply, and famously urged President Bush not to go wobbly. I always liked the Iron Lady. She was cool. Now, once persuaded, U.S. officials insisted on a total Iraqi pullout from Kuwait without any linkage to other Middle Eastern problems, accepting the British view that any concessions would strengthen Iraqi influence in the region for years to come. Not kidding. Now, on the 12th of August, Saddam proposed that all cases of occupation and those cases that had been portrayed as occupation in the region be resolved simultaneously. Specifically, he called for Israel to withdraw from occupied territories of Palestine, Syria and Lebanon, Syria to withdraw from Lebanon, and the mutual withdrawals by Iraq and Iran in agreement for the situation in Kuwait. No. He also called for the replacement of U.S. troops that mobilized in Saudi Arabia in response to Kuwait's invasion with an Arab force, as long as the force did not involve Egypt. Additionally, he requested an immediate freeze of all boycott and siege decisions and a general normalization of relations with Iraq. From the beginning of the crisis, President Bush was strongly opposed to any linkage between Iraq's occupation of Kuwait and the Palestinian issue. No duh.
What?
The 23rd of August, Saddam appeared on state television with Western hostages to whom he had refused exit visas. In the video, he asked a young British boy, Stuart Lockwood, whether he was getting his milk, and goes on to say through his interpreter, "We hope your presence as guests here will not be for too long. Your presence here and in other places is meant to prevent the scourge of war." Basically, hostages.
Basically, it's your fault if there's a war.
Well, then we're going to use you as human shield. Something the Palestinians like to do.
I'm just saying.
Yeah. Another Iraqi proposal, communicated in August 1990, was delivered to the UN National Security Council, Brett Scowcroft, by an unidentified Iraqi official. The official communicated to the White House that Iraq would withdraw from Kuwait and allow foreigners to leave, provided the UN lifted sanctions, allowed guaranteed access to the Persian Gulf through the Kuwaiti islands of Bubiyan and Warba, and allowed Iraq to gain full control of the Rumaila oil field that extends slightly into Kuwait territory. The proposal also included offers to negotiate an oil agreement with the United States satisfactory to both nations' national security interests, develop a joint plan to alleviate Iraq's economical and financial problems, and jointly work on the stability of the Gulf. Well, on the 29th of November, 1990, the Security Council passed the Resolution 678, which gave Iraq until the 15th of January, 1991, to withdraw from Kuwait and empowered states to use all necessary means to force Iraq out of Kuwait after the deadline. Basically, it's put up or shut up time.
Uh-oh.
Well, in December 1990, Iraq made a proposal to withdraw from Kuwait provided that foreign troops left the region and an agreement was reached regarding the Palestinian problem and the dismantlement of both Israel's and Iraq's weapons of mass destruction.
I like how they put that. The Palestinian problem.
Yeah. Well, the White House, as you figured out, rejected the proposal, and the PLO's Yasser Arafat, or Yucky Arafat, expressed that neither him nor Saddam insisted that solving the Israel-Palestine issues should be a precondition to solving the issues in Kuwait, though he did acknowledge a strong link between the problems. Well, ultimately, the U.S. and U.K. Stuck to their position that there would be no negotiations until Iraq withdrew from Kuwait, and they should not grant Iraq concessions, lest they give the impression that Iraq benefited from the military campaign. Also, when the U.S. Secretary of State James Baker met with Tariq Aziz in Geneva, one of your playing cards, Switzerland for the last-minute peace talks in early 1991, Aziz reportedly made no concrete proposals and did not outline any hypothetical Iraqi moves. Well, the 14th of January came around, and France proposed that the UN Security Council call for a rapid and massive withdrawal from Kuwait, along with a statement to the Iraq that Council members would bring their active contribution to a settlement of the region's other problems, in particular the Arab-Israeli conflict, and particularly the Palestinian problem, by convening at an appropriate moment an international conference to ensure the security, stability, and development of this region of the world. The France proposal was supported by Belgium, at the moment one of the rotating council members, Germany, Spain, Italy, Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, and several non-aligned states. The U.S., UN, and the Soviet Union rejected it.
What? And
the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Thomas Pickering, stated that the French proposal was unacceptable because it went beyond previous council resolutions on the Iraqi invasion. France dropped this proposal and it found no tangible sign of interest from Baghdad. Basically, they were at the stage of saying, let's see what happens. Now, one of the main concerns for the Western world was the significant threat Iraq posed to Saudi Arabia. Following the conquest, the Iraqi army was within easy striking of Saudi oil fields. Control of these fields, along with the Kuwaiti and the Iraqi reserves, would have given Saddam control of a majority of the world's oil reserves. Iraq also had a number of grievances with Saudi Arabia. The Saudis had lent Iraq $26 billion during the war with Iran. I think they want their money back.
What? Why?
Because it's $26 billion.
That's a change.
Yeah, pocket change. Well, the Saudis had backed them, and they feared the influence of the Shia Iran's Islamic Revolution on its own Shia minority. And after the war, Saddam felt he should not have to repay the loans due to the help he had given the Saudis by fighting Iran. Kind of overplaying your hand, if you ask me. So, after the conquest of Kuwait, Saddam began verbally attacking the Saudis. He argued that the U.S.-supported Saudi state was an illegitimate and unworthy guardian of the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. He combined his language with the Islamist groups that had recently fought in Afghanistan with the rhetoric Iran had long used to attack the Saudis. It almost sounds like he's trying to pick a fight and he's not doing a very good job of it.
Oh, I don't know.
Let's do everything to take and make everybody look bad because you're dealing with America. Now, acting on the Carter Doctrine policy, and out of fear of the Iraqi army could launch an invasion of Saudi Arabia, U.S. President George H.W. Bush quickly announced the U.S. would launch a wholly defensive mission to prevent Iraq from invading Saudi Arabia under the codename Operation Desert Shield. Now, this operation would begin on the 7th of August, 1990, and U.S. troops were sent to Saudi Arabia, due also to the request of the monarch, King Fahd, who had earlier called for U.S. military assistance. This wholly defensive doctrine was quickly abandoned when, on August the 8th, Iraq declared Kuwait to be Iraqi's 19th province, and Saddam named his cousin as the military governor. Well, the U.S. Navy dispatched 2 naval battle groups built around aircraft carriers USS Dwight D. Eisenhower and the USS Independence to the Persian Gulf, where they were made ready by the 8th of August. The U.S. also sent in the USS Missouri and the USS Wisconsin to the region. A total of 48 U.S. Air Force F-15s from the 1st Fighter Wing at Langley landed in Saudi Arabia and immediately condensed around-the-clock air patrols of the Saudi-Kuwait-Iraq border to discourage further Iraqi military advances. They were joined by 36 F-18 A's through D's from the 36th Tactical Fighter Wing at Bitburg, Germany. The Bitburg contingent was based out at the Al-Kharj Air Base, approximately an hour south of Regia, and the 36th Tactical Fighter Wing would be responsible for 11 confirmed Iraqi Air Force aircraft being shot down during the war. 2 Air National Guard units were stationed at Al-Kharj Air Base. The South Carolina Air National Guard's 169th Fighter Wing would fly bombing missions with 24 F-16s, flying 2,000 combat missions and dropping 4 million pounds of munitions, with the New York Air National Guard's 174th Fighter Wing from Syracuse flying 24 F-16s on bombing missions. Military buildup continued from there, eventually reaching 543,000 troops, twice the number used in the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Much of the material was airlifted or carried to the staging area via fast sea lift ships, allowing a quick buildup. Now, as part of this buildup, amphibious exercises were carried out in the Gulf, including Operation Imminent Thunder, which involved the USS Midway and 15 other ships, 1,100 aircraft, and 1,000 Marines. In a press conference, General Schwarzkopf stated that these exercises were intended to deceive the Iraqi forces, forcing them to continue their defense of the Kuwaiti coastline. Basically, we're going to stand over here and wave at you. Hi. We're over here. Hi. We're going to come over and kick your butt. Hi. Now, a series of these resolutions and Arab League resolutions were passed regarding Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, and Resolution 678, passed on the 29th of November, again gave Iraq the withdrawal deadline, the 15th of January. And, they authorized all necessary means to uphold and implement Resolution 660, basically said, after the 15th, the gloves are off. Well, to ensure that the U.S. received economic backing, James Baker went on an 11-day journey to 9 countries in September 1990, which the press dubbed the Tin Cup trip. The first stop was Saudi Arabia, which a month before had already granted permission for the United States to use its facilities. However, Baker believed that the Saudi Arabia should assume some of the cost of the military efforts to defend it. When Baker asked King Fahd for $15 billion, the king readily agreed.
Yay!
With the promise, Baker asked Kuwait for the same amount. On the next day, he did just that, and the Emir of Kuwait, displaced at the Sheraton Hotel outside his invaded country, easily agreed. Baker then moved to enter talks with Egypt, whose leadership considered the moderate voice of the Middle East. President Mubarak was furious with Saddam Hussein for his invasion and for the fact that Saddam had assured Mubarak that his invasion was not his intention. Well, what the heck were you thinking it was going to be? Playing patty cake?
Uh-huh.
Hey. Egypt additionally received approximately $7 billion in debt forgiveness for providing its support and troops for the U.S.-led invasion. After stops in Helsinki and Moscow to smooth out Iraqi demands for a Middle Eastern press conference with the Soviet Union, Baker would travel to Syria to discuss his role with the crisis with its president Hafiz Assad. Assad had a deep personal enmity towards Saddam, which is defined by the fact that Saddam had been trying to kill him for years.
What?
Charming.
No.
Now, harboring this animosity and impressed with Baker's diplomatic initiative to visit Damascus, relations that had been severed since the 1983 bombing of a U.S. Marines barracks in Beirut, Assad agreed to pledge up to 100,000 Syrian troops to the coalition effort. This was a vital step in ensuring Arab states were represented in the coalition. In exchange, Washington gave al-Assad a green light to wipe out forces opposing Syria's rule in Lebanon and arranged for weapons valued at $1 billion to be provided to Syria, mostly through Gulf states. In exchange for the Iran's support of the U.S.-led intervention, the U.S. government promised Iranian government to end U.S. opposition to World Bank loans to Iran. On the day before the ground invasion began, the World Bank gave Iran its first loan of $250 million. Now, Baker flew to Rome for a brief visit with the Italians, who promised the use of some military equipment before journeying to Germany to meet with American ally Chancellor Kohl. Although Germany's constitution, which was brokered essentially by the U.S., prohibited military involvement outside of Germany's borders, Kohl committed a $2 billion contribution to the coalition's war effort, as well as further economic military support of coalition ally Turkey and the transportation of Egyptian soldiers and ships to the Persian Gulf. The coalition of forces opposing Iraq's aggression was formed, consisting of forces from 42 countries. Countries like Argentina, Australia, Bahrain, Bangladesh, Belgium, Canada, Czechoslovakia, Denmark, Egypt, France, Germany, Greece, Honduras, Hungary, Italy, Japan, Kuwait, Luxembourg, Morocco, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Nigeria, Norway, Oman, Pakistan, the Philippines, Poland, Portugal, Qatar, Romania, Saudi Arabia, Senegal, Sierra Leone, Singapore, South Korea, Spain, Sweden, Syria, Turkey,
Wow.
the United Arab Emirates, the United Kingdom, and the United States. I think if you were in the Iraqi army, you looked over the border and you saw all those flags, I'd probably have an accident.
What?
I need my Depends now. But, yeah, you look at all these different soldiers. I mean, they even had a group of Afghan Mujahideen soldiers who reportedly joined near the end of the war. The largest coalition that was set up since World War II. U.S. Army General Norman Schwarzkopf, one of my personal favorites, was designated as the commander of the coalition forces in the Persian Gulf area. The Soviet Union condemned Baghdad's aggression against Kuwait, but did not support the U.S. and its allied intervention in Iraq, and even tried to avert it. Although they did not contribute any forces, Japan and Germany made financial contributions, totaling $10 billion and $6.6 billion, respectively. Luxembourg also provided financial support to the coalition, and U.S. troops represented about 73% of the coalition's 956,000 soldiers in Iraq. Now, many of this coalition's countries were reluctant to commit military forces. Some felt the war was an internal Arab affair and did not want to increase U.S. influence in the Middle East. In the end, however, many governments were persuaded by Iraq's belligerence towards the other Arab states in offers of economic aid or debt forgiveness and threats to withhold aid. Now, the justification off of all this, the U.S. and the UN gave several public justifications for involvement. The most prominent was the Iraqi violation of territorial integrity. At the same time, the U.S. moved to support its ally Saudi Arabia. The importance of the region and a key supplier of oil made it a considerable geopolitical importance. Shortly after the Iraqi invasion, U.S. Defense Secretary Dick Cheney made the first of several visits to Saudi Arabia, where King Fahd requested U.S. military assistance. During a speech in the special joint session of the U.S. Congress given on the 11th of September, 1990, Bush summed up the reasons with the following remarks. Within 3 days, 120,000 Iraqi troops with 850 tanks poured into Kuwait and moved south to threaten Saudi Arabia. It was then that I decided to act to check that aggression. The Pentagon stated that satellite photos showing a buildup of Iraqi forces along the border were the source of this information, but was later alleged to be false. A reporter from the St. Peter's Times acquired 2 commercial Soviet satellite maps made at the time, which showed nothing but empty desert. Now, other justifications for foreign involvement included Iraq's history of human rights abuses under Saddam. This is a guy who openly would gas his own people. Charming guy.
Sounds like a nice dude. Let's go hang out with him.
He used chemical weapons on the Kurds in his own country. Nice guy, you know. And then some of the rumors of what he did to civilians in Kuwait City. You know, visit hospitals, yank babies out of incubators, and drop them on the floor. Charming people, you know. Now, they also talked about the Iraqi military committing human rights abuses during the invasion, alleged incidents that received the most publicity. Looking at the public relations issues. But it said it hired the public relations firms Hill and Knowlton for about $11 million. It was paid by Kuwaiti's government, and among the means of influencing U.S. opinion, such as distributing books on Iraq atrocities to the U.S. soldiers deployed in the region, free Kuwait T-shirts, and speakers at college campuses, dozens of news releases to TV stations, the firm arranged for the appearance before a group of members of the U.S. Congress in which a young woman, identifying herself as a nurse who worked at the Kuwait City Hospital, described Iraqi soldiers putting babies out of incubators and letting them die on the floor. It says the story helped tie up both public and Congress towards a war with Iraq. 6 congressmen said the testimony was enough to support military action against Iraq, and 7 senators referenced the testimony in debate. Senators supported a military action in a 52 to 47 vote. However, a year after the war, says that this allegation was revealed to be a fabrication. The young woman who testified was found to be a member of the royal family. So what's taken place? Of course, what's funny is it also mentions here citation needed. So depending on who is writing this article, it might have been Holcomb too. But as they like to say, you know, if they're going to take and fight a war, might as well have public opinion on your side, right?
Right.
Anyway, in reality, as it says, the Iraqi army did commit various well-documented crimes during its occupation of Kuwait, such as the summary execution without trial of 3 brothers, who their bodies were stacked and left to decay in a public street. Iraqi troops also ransacked and looted private Kuwaiti homes. One resident apparently was reportedly crapped in. A resident later commented, the whole thing for violence was for the sake of violence. The destruction for the sake of destruction. It's like a surrealistic painting by Salvador Dali. And
sounds like war.
Yeah. Now, like I was saying, is when this was all going on, I was a junior in high school. I was taking a class, some of you might remember, it was called Current World Affairs. And so every day you'd start the class with usually a 10-minute clip off of CNN. And so literally the war was broadcast right into our homes. In the evenings at 5 o'clock you would have ABC News, and then at 5:30 you'd have the local news. And so you might get the information 3 times a day. Well, what finally wound up happening is that I remember in school they said, did you hear we've started bombing? And sure enough, the 16th, the 15th was the deadline. Right away on the 16th, there was an extensive aerial bombing that we did to Iraq. And we went after Kuwait targets for 42 consecutive days and nights. Iraq's forces were some of the largest intensive air bombardments in military histories. Over 100,000 sorties, dropping 88,500 tons of bombs, which widely destroyed military and civilian infrastructure. Iraq anti-aircraft defenses, manned portable air defense systems, surprisingly enough, were ineffective against enemy aircraft. This is when we started bringing out some of our fun tricks, like the stealth bombers and stuff. Well, you can't hit us.
Can't see us.
Can't hit what you can't see. Interestingly enough, the coalition only lost 75 aircrafts, over 100,000 sorties, 44 due to Iraqi action. 2 of the losses were a result of aircraft colliding with the ground while evading Iraqi ground-fired weapons.
Well,
and one of these losses was a confirmed air-to-air victory. The Iraqis, interestingly enough, tried a stunt where they tried to launch Scud missiles at Israel to try to prompt Israel to attack them directly. And then hopefully all the Arab states would combine together. But needless to say, it did not work that way.
what? Well,
Yeah.
why not?
For some reason, we were able to talk the Israelis into not turning around. But I think that was about the same time that we also started helping them shoot down Scud missiles. Iraq would fire 88 Scud missiles during the war's 7 weeks. And, yeah, it didn't work as they were hoping it would. The Yasek Shamir was persuaded by President Bush to not retaliate and to withdraw Israeli jets, fearing the attacks. If Israel attacked Iraq, the other Arab states would either desert the coalition or join Iraq. It was also feared that if Israel used Syrian or Jordanian airspace to attack Iraq, they would intervene in the war on Iraq's side or attack Israel. This is when we brought in our Patriot missile systems. We would defend Israel if it refrained from responding to this context. The Patriots were actually pretty effective at knocking down Scud missiles. Scuds, to their value, were relatively ineffective. Firing at extreme range resulted in a dramatic reduction of accuracy. 2 Israeli civilians died as a direct result of missile attacks. And between 11 and 74 were killed from the incorrect use of gas masks, heart attacks, or the incorrect use of anti-chemical weapons, drugs, atropine. Approximately 230 Israelis were injured, and extensive property damage was also caused. And according to the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs, damage to general property consisted of 1,302 houses, 6,142 apartments, and 23 public buildings, 200 shops, and 50 cars. Darn, that car was already on. It was feared that Iraq would fire missiles filled with nerve agents like sarin, and as a result, Israel's government issued out gas masks to its citizens. When the first Iraqi missiles hit Israel, some people injected themselves with an antidote for nerve gas, and it had been suggested that the sturdy construction techniques used by Israeli cities, coupled with the fact that the Scuds were only launched at night, played an important role in limiting the number of casualties from Scud attacks. Good ways to take and keep people safe. Also, coalition air forces were extensively exercised in Scud hunts. Let's go find our targets. And it worked out pretty good. They were able to find, locate, and destroy camouflage trucks before they fired their missiles at Israel or Saudi Arabia. And on the ground, special operation forces were infiltrating Iraq, tasked with locating and destroying Scuds, including the ill-fated Bravo 20 patrol of the SAS. Once special operations were combined with the air patrols, the number of attacks fell sharply and then increased slightly as the Iraqi forces adjusted to the coalition attacks. Well, as these attacks increased, the Israelis grew increasingly impatient and considered taking unilateral military action. On the 22nd of January, a Scud missile hit the Israeli city of Ramat Gan, and 2 coalition patriots failed to intercept it. 3 people, elderly people, suffered heart attacks, and another 96 people were injured. The 20 apartment buildings were damaged. After the attack, the Israelis warned that if the U.S. failed to stop the attacks, they would. At one point, the Israeli commandos boarded helicopters prepared to fly into Iraq, but the mission was called off after a phone call from Dick Cheney, reporting the extent of the coalition forces to destroy Scuds and emphasizing Israeli intervention could endanger U.S. forces. Well, in addition to the attacks, 47 Scud missiles were fired into Saudi Arabia, and one was fired at Bahrain and another at Qatar. The missiles were fired at both military and civilian targets. One Saudi civilian was killed. 78 others were injured. No casualties were reported in Bahrain or Qatar. The Saudi government issued all citizens and expatriates with gas masks in the event of Iraq using missiles with warheads containing chemical weapons. The governments would broadcast alerts and all-clear messages over television and warn citizens during Scud attacks. The second episode of the thing, on the 25th of February, a Scud missile hit the U.S. Army barracks of the 14th Quartermaster Detachment out of Greenburg, Pennsylvania, stationed at Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and it killed 28 soldiers, injuring over 100. Subsequent investigation found that the assigned Patriot missile battery had failed to engage due to a loss of significant effect in the onboard computer's floating point calculations, compounding over 100 hours of consecutive use, shifting the range gate position far enough to lose contact with the Scud tracking action. Now, there was a small engagement on the 29th of January. Iraqi forces actually attacked and occupied a lightly defended Saudi city of Khafji with tanks and infantry. The battle ended 2 days later when the Iraqis were driven back by the Saudi Arabian National Guard and supported by Qatari forces and U.S. Marines. The Allied forces used extensive artillery fire. Not light artillery fire, extensive. Extensive, which means we're going to rock your world. Now, both sides suffered casualties. All the Iraqi forces sustained substantially more dead and captured than the Allied forces, and 11 Americans were killed in two separate friendly fire incidents, and an additional 14 airmen were killed when the AC-130 gunship was shot down by an Iraqi surface-to-air missile. Two soldiers were captured during the battle. Saudi and Qatari forces had a total of 18 dead, and Iraqi forces in Kaj had about 60 to 300 dead and 400 captured. Well, the Battle of Kafshi was an example of how air power could single-handedly hinder the advance of enemy ground forces. Upon learning the Iraqi troop movements, 140 coalition aircraft were diverted to attack an advancing column consisting of two armored divisions in battalion-sized units. Precision standoff attacks were conducted during the night and through the next day. Iraqi vehicle losses included 357 tanks and 147 armored personnel carriers and 89 mobile artillery pieces. Basically, they were raking them over. Some crews simply abandoned their vehicles upon realizing they could be destroyed by guided bombs, stopping the divisions from massing for an organized attack on the town. One Iraqi soldier who had fought in the Iran-Iraq War remarked to his brigade had sustained more punishment from Allied air power in 30 minutes at Kafshi than in 8 years of fighting against Iran. Oops. That's not good. Now, the two things that I do remember quite vividly, and again, this is from talking with friends that actually served over there, and some of the things that had happened. Two of the biggest problems Iraq ran into was either they didn't understand or they thought their tanks were better than this. They were using Soviet tanks, usually T-62s. And what the Iraqis thought would be an absolutely brilliant, very smart idea is that they would bring up their tanks, and part of the problem is that Saddam Hussein didn't trust his own men, which is kind of understandable. A lot of places over there, there's always like one knock away from having a revolution, a coup attempt. And so, the tanks weren't filled with a lot of gasoline, but they also, when they moved the tanks up to their fighting lines, they would drop the drivetrain. And so basically, your tank is now a pillbox. Now, where this becomes the problem is that what is our number one most effective trick that we have in our books? We have air superiority. We've been practicing air superiority for over a month over there, through January, through mid-February, and we're shooting down planes, we're blowing up stuff on the ground, we're hitting targets. You just gave us all of these tanks as targets. Yeah, this is not going to be pretty. And so, obviously tanks are going to be, a big fat bullseye for missiles, for bomb runs. And then the other aspect of it is what they basically eventually started calling was the video game war, because it looked so simple. We would roll up with a bunch of tanks, and you'd see the green screen, and these guys would be like, well, we can see them, but they can't see us. And all of a sudden, we just started popping off tanks, one after another. We start hitting, positions, one after another. When the final ground attack came through, it was just absolutely insane, because, we started off with an artillery barrage, 90,000 rounds. Now, go ahead and try to put that into your imagination. In 2.5 hours, that is a lot of ordnance going off. I remember as a kid out at Fort Ripley in Minnesota when they were doing their artillery practices, and you could hear it. And we were still a good 3-4 miles away from the base. So that had to be extremely loud, but also unnerving, because you're like, When's it going to be our turn?
You don't get a turn.
This is not going to be good. And so they heard this barrage coming in, and then First Division Artillery, 4 to 3 fire artillery divisions would fire off their artillery rounds. They would then come across the border, and these combat operations saw the destruction of 50 enemy tanks, 139 APCs, 30 air defense systems, 152 artillery pieces, 27 missile launchers, 108 mortars, and 548 wheeled vehicles, 61 trench lines, bunker positions, 92 dug-in and open infantry targets, and 34 logistical sites. They just mowed through.
I would.
They also mentioned the ground campaign consisted of 3 or possibly 4 of the largest tank battles in American military histories. The battle at 73 Eastern, Norfolk, and Medina Ridge are well noted for their historical significance. Some consider the Battle of Medina Ridge the largest tank battle in the war. The other thing that was, I have to say that it probably was both extremely demoralizing, but also you just had to imagine. They brought the 2 battleships that we brought into the operation, the Missouri and the Wisconsin, and they would launch a drone out to find targets, and then they'd measure and they'd radio back, and all of a sudden these big cannons rotated, the guns fired. And when a battleship of that size lets go, there's a sonic effect that goes out, and then it comes in and it explodes. Well, it got so bad that the soldiers were surrendering to the drone. It's like, please don't kill us. Do something, We're tired of being blown up here. But anyway, these tank battles would come roaring through. Battle at Norfolk was the largest battle of the war, second largest tank battle in American history. The U.S. Marine Corps also had the biggest tank battle in history at the Kuwait International Airport. The U.S. 3rd Armored Division also fought a significant battle at the objective Dorset, not far from the Battle of Norfolk took place. And the U.S. 3rd Armored Division destroyed approximately 300 enemy combat vehicles during this particular encounter with Iraqi forces. U.S. 7th Corps was the primary combat formation of the coalition forces. It was a formative fighting force. I just wrapping my mind around the logics of this. This fighting force consisted of 1,487 tanks, 1,384 infantry fighting vehicles, 568 artillery pieces, 132 MLRS, 8 missile launchers, and 242 attack helicopters.
Woo!
That was a big frickin' force. Total troop strength, 146,321 troops. Primary full-strength fighting formations was the 1st Armored Division, 3rd Armored Division, and the 1st Infantry Division. The 2nd Armored Division was assigned to the 1st Infantry Division as its 3rd Maneuver Brigade. Task Force 141 Infantry would spearhead the 7th Corps. In addition, the Corps had the 2nd Cavalry Regiment and is acting as a scouting and screening force. 2 further heavy divisions, the 1st Cavalry Division and the United Kingdom's 1st Armored Division, as well as the 11th Aviation Group. The 7th Corps fought a number of large battles against Iraqi forces, some of them historical in scope and size. 3 of the battles at Norfolk, Medina Ridge, and the 73 East take history. Again, as mentioned, largest tank battles in history. At the end of combat operations on the 28th of February, they had driven 160 miles, captured 22,000 Iraqi soldiers, destroyed 1,350 Iraqi tanks, 1,224 armored personnel carriers, 285 artillery pieces, 105 air defense systems, and 1,229 trucks. Now, primary combat vehicles for the American divisions are our favorite friend, the M1A1 Abrams tank with the Bradley fighting vehicles. The primary military systems for artillery was the propelled M109 howitzers. primary American attack helicopter was the Apache.
No.
They also used the Bell AH-1 Cobra. And my personal favorite, A-10 Fairchild Republic Thunderbolt II ground attack aircraft would distinguish itself during the Gulf War, aided by the OH-58D Jet Eyes of the Sky. Together, they would inflict significant damage on Iraqi ground forces. The Warthog crews would destroy 900 Iraqi tanks, 2,000 other military vehicles, and 1,200 artillery pieces during combat operations. The U.S. Marine Corps would be represented by the 1st Marine Division and the 2nd Marine Division. These were supported by the U.S. Army's 2nd Armored Division's Tiger Brigade to provide the Marines with additional armor support. Marine armor units mostly consisted of the older M60 tanks. The 1st Marine Division destroyed about 60 Iraqi tanks near the Burgan oil field without suffering any losses. 1st Marine Division Task Force Ripper led the drive to the Kuwait International Airport on the 27th of February, and the Marines Task Force Ripper destroyed about 100 Iraqi tanks and armored personnel carriers, including T-72 tanks. Now, just a quick thing to point out here. Okay, T-72s, T-62s, these are all Soviet-built tanks. I can't imagine that they were very thrilled with the idea of watching their tanks burn on other countries. Granted, they're probably happy that they're not Soviet property burning, but,
Right.
it doesn't exactly bode well if you're trying to sell them to the world as, top-of-the-line tanks. Now, once the Marine Division reached the international airport, they found what remained of the Iraqi 12th Armored Brigade, 3rd Armored Division defending it. The Marines destroyed 30 to 40 Iraqi T-72 tanks, which had taken up defensive positions around the airport. The Iraqi 3rd Armored Division losses included more than 250 T-55 and T-62s and 70 T-72 tanks by the end of combat operations. The Iraqi 3rd Armored Division would be totally destroyed. The 2nd Marine Division played a major role in repelling the attempted Iraqi invasion of Saudi Arabia, which is known as the Battle of Khafji. The 2nd Marine Division also faced heavy resistance during the Battle of the Kuwait International Airport. The battle featured the Revel engagement, in which went on to become the largest tank battle in Marine Corps entire history. The Marine Reserve Unit Bravo Company, 4th Tank Battalion, 4th Marine Division, was assigned to the 2nd Marine Division, and Bravo Company destroyed a total of 119 enemy vehicles and took over 800 POWs by the end of combat operations. The 1st Tank Battalion claimed 50 Iraqi T-55 and T-62 tanks and 25 APCs. The 3rd Battalion claimed 57 T-55s and T-62s, along with 5 T-72s, 7 APCs, and 10 trucks. Some guys over there just calculating this. Hey, this is great, guys. No wonder they called it a video game. Next screen, click.
Right?
U.S. Marine Corps units would destroy hundreds of Iraqi tanks by the end of combat operations. The U.S. Marine Corps' tanks losses would be light, as they suffered a loss of less than 10 M60 tanks during combat operations. Yeah, that's pretty crazy. United Kingdom even showed up with their fun. I love these guys. 1st Armored Division, known as the Desert Rats. British 1st Armored Division fielded approximately 176 Challenger 1 tanks. The British infantry rode into battle in the Warrior-tracked armored vehicles, had a reasonable armor protection and a 30mm gun. Modified version of the vehicle included mortar carriers, mid-launch anti-tank systems, and command and control vehicles, and the British possessed a variety of excellent light armored vehicles built on the Scorpion chassis. British artillery was primarily American-made, with the M109 howitzers, M110 howitzers, and the M270 MLRS, which were compatible with American systems. Air support would consist of the Gazelle helicopters, the Lynx helicopter, which is comparable to the AH-1 Cobra, and the British had their full contingent of engineer, logistics, and medical units. The British 1st Armored Division was responsible for protecting the right flank of the 7th Corps, and it was assumed that the Corps' planners The Iraqi 52nd Armored Division would counterattack the 7th Corps once penetration into the Iraqi defenses was discovered. The British 1st Armored Division had 2 brigades, 4th and 7th, which participated in Operation Granby, the name given to the British military operations during the 91 Gulf War. British 1st Armored Divisions had traveled 217 miles in 97 hours. British 1st Armored Division had captured or destroyed about 300 Iraqi tanks and a very large number of armored personnel carriers, trucks, reconnaissance vehicles, and etc. Desert Rats also destroyed a number of artillery positions. The division took over 7,000 prisoners of war, including 2 division commanders and 2 other general officers. The British 1st Armored Division destroyed or isolated 4 divisions of infantry, 26th, 48th, 31st, and the 25th, and overran the Iraqi 52nd Armored Division in several sharp engagements. The Iraqis' 80th Armored Brigade would also fall victim to the British Armored 1st Division. In Iraq was mostly represented by its own 7th Corps and its Jihad Corps. Its most notable participants was the elite Republican Guard divisions Talhalna, Medina, Hamabare, and Adan. The first 3 of these had a strength of over 660 tanks, 660 infantry fighting vehicles, and thousands of anti-tank weapons, self-propelled artillery, and other combat systems. The Dakota Republican Guard Division was Iraq's most powerful division with approximately 14,000 soldiers, 220 T-72 tanks, 284 infantry fighting vehicles, 126 artillery pieces, 18 MLRS. The Iraqi 52nd Armored Division was a primary participant. It was a powerful division consisting of 245 tanks and 195 armored fighting vehicles. The Iraq's 10th and 12th Armored Divisions were also present. The 2 divisions formed the foundation of the Jihad Corps. The Iraqis' 10th Armored Division was considered the best regular division of the Iraqi army. They had more modern equipment than the other regular units. It was equipped with the T-72s and some 62 tanks. The T-62 was being the primary system. Overall, the primary tank of the Iraqi forces was the T-55s. Now, the Iraqis fielded them in great numbers, and the Iraqis also had elements of 2 other independent armored brigades in theater, being the 50th and the 29th Armored Brigades, and it was the Iraqis also fielded multiple infantry divisions. Well, Iraqis would suffer a loss of over 3,000 tanks and over 2,000 combat vehicles during these battles against the American-led coalition. Estimated the Iraqi forces suffered 20,000 to 50,000 troops killed during the combat operations, estimating that over 75,000 Iraqi soldiers were wounded. Between 80 and 175,000 Iraqi troops were taken prisoner, and the Iraqi forces inflicted very minimal damage on the coalition forces. Now, the other aspect that came to the attention as these, attacks were going on, again, the primary reason for the coalition wasn't going to be to destroy and remove Saddam Hussein. They were to liberate Kuwait in full. The one aspect that just became absolutely crazy was that they had a bunch of, you almost want to say they were soldiers that were grabbing anything and anything that they could to get out of Kuwait City. Stealing cars, military form of carjacking, basically. Anything that had wheels, they were grabbing it and taking off up the highway. They were trying to get out of the country as fast as they could with anything that could move. If they had a tank, they would take the tank. If they had a Jeep, they would take the Jeep. If they had some guy's car off the street, show a gun, take it from them. Just, Eventually, we found out this was going on. And the word was passed down through a few officers, and they said, yeah, we can handle this problem. And needless to say, the problem was very swift, very direct, and A-10s had quite a time, and they shot up just a number of vehicles all the way up the highway. They showed some of the debris, tanks, turrets ripped completely off, windshields, full of bullet holes. Of course, a couple times they had guys go up there and they'd said, well, whoever was in it got out right before it got strafed because there was no blood inside the car. But they said, we don't know about the original owner of the car. But it showed how definitive and complete that this attack was. And, true to their word, by the time the whole operation was done, Kuwait was liberated. They had removed the Iraqi presence, pushed them back over the border. Of course, they still left a problem with Saddam Hussein being in power. They tried to adjust that with a no-fly zone, but, another matter for another day and another page. But yeah, on this day, officially, the ground war, or I should say the operation would kick off with many a strike, lots of aircraft, and it would start the beginning of the end for Saddam Hussein's quest to keep Kuwait as a province. But that's been the Bearded Historian. We'll catch you folks next week. You have a good one out there.
I'm going to have to find a lot of pictures.
Yes.